Welcome back to my channel for an episode which I hope you guys will like because I think it's super interesting, but it's also pretty nerdy. And you guys know that I have an attitude being nerdy and doing things other people avoid. And what I want to introduce in this video for the first time is my new testing environment for rolling shutter effects if you use electronic shutter on digital cameras. And I just developed this. It's homemade, self-made, tailor-made for me. And I thought, why not showing it on the channel? And if I do so, why not using the opportunity and putting the Hasselblad X2D Mark II to test in this new laboratory? Let's kick this off. If you have not yet subscribed to my channel, please do so. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, support my work. I'm super grateful for it. For you, it's for free, but it helps to increase the reach of my channel. Many thanks for that. All right, so what is rolling shutter and why does it occur if we use electronic shutter on digital cameras? And here on the Hasselblad X2D, it's pretty simple. Let me switch this on. And if I go here into the menu, and in the menu, we go here to exposure. I can, under exposure, activate the electronic shutter. And then the shutter is based on electronics, on the sensor itself sitting in the camera, and no longer on the leaf shutter, which in the Hasselblad X and V system sits in the lens. And if I deactivate it, I'm back to leaf shutter. And that has a lot of advantages, but also has limitations in terms of how fast my shutter speed can be. We come to all of that in the course of the video. So what is a rolling shutter effect? Well, if you switch a camera like the Hasselblad X2D Mark II into electronic shutter only, then the sensor starts typically from top to bottom to read out the sensor and transport the information and the signal to the processing engine. And if this process is not quick enough, we talk about a rolling shutter effect. And the process of reading out the sensor line by line actually is called the rolling shutter. And the distortions you get are typically diagonal. And here are two examples. In this case, we also have some movement fuzziness here. And you see how these objects, these subjects are distorted in a diagonal way. And that is, of course, an image you will never be able to use. There is a concept of sensors which have a global shutter. And here it works completely different. If we look at this sensor in the illustration before again, then a global shutter means that the whole sensor is read out simultaneously in every line, in every pixel, in one shot. And as far as I'm aware, in, let's call it, the professional photography camp, we have only one camera so far who can do this, and that's the Sony Alpha 9 Mark III. So how can we test for rolling shutter effects? Well, first of all, we switch the camera into electronic shutter, which I demonstrated before. We go here to exposure, and in exposure, we activate the electronic shutter, which deactivates the leaf shutter in the lens. And then I have developed now a Python script, and in Python on my MacBook, will create an animation and photograph that animation. And depending on whether we see diagonal distortions or not, we get a sense for rolling shutter effects occurring on a particular sensor in a digital camera. So let me quickly show you that script, and then let's turn this into action and test the Hasselblad X2D Mark II for rolling shutter effects in the electronic shutter mode. Here I'm now in my Python script, and I developed this Python script here for testing for rolling shutter effects. And the plan is to having an animation of a rectangle flying horizontally through the screen from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, and then starting all over again from the left-hand side. And I wanted to do this also with some steering options, so I can control by keys on my keyboard the speed, the size, and I can also exit this, of course, via escape. And if you look here, I create a window with 1920 times 1080 dimensions in terms of pixels. I will create that rectangle. It will be a square at first, but I can change the size if I want. And then, of course, I need to create a loop here after creating the main window where I draw the rectangle, and then where I continuously ask for keys whether there is something that should be changed in the representation of that rectangle, like the size, the speed, what have you. I show you this live in a moment. And in this way, I can shoot that rectangle. I show you the parameters on the camera in a moment. And we will detect a few known facts about rolling shutter effects. And we will also see whether the Hasselblad X2D Mark II can actually process that information in terms of readout time of the sensor and image processing in camera quick enough to not have any distortions on that animation. So let's run the script for a moment so I can show you how this looks like. Let's go into play. And now you see the rectangle here flying currently pretty speedy over the screen. I can change the speed with a control key here, and then it slows down. And in this way, we can also start to increase the level of stress we impose to the electronic shutter of the camera. We can also increase the speed again. Look here, I can speed this up. Makes me a bit nervous if it flies too quickly. We can change the size in both directions. Have a look here. I can make this longer, shorter, what I want. I can, in this way, control my shape. And we are looking for diagonal distortions, which you will see in a moment in the live demonstration. So that's the way it works. With Escape, I can get out of that animation and will be back in my Python script. Simple like that. All right, let's turn this into action. Let's get our plan materializing. And what I have now set up here is the camera. The lens on the camera is my, by now already beloved 35-100 lens. Such a brilliant lens. If you have not seen my videos about this lens, I'll put the links down below in the info box. Please have a look. And I'm pointing with the camera towards my MacBook Pro. Still the Python script not running. And in terms of shooting parameters, I have here auto ISO because I don't care about image quality. This is about the readout time of the sensor and the speed of image processing in camera. I've put the camera into manual focus mode here. And you, by the way, see here under electronic shutter, autofocus continuous is always grayed out, and that I'm currently in electronic shutter mode. You see here an E in a white rectangle on the left-hand side of the shutter speed, which is 1/500 seconds. The widest open aperture I can have on 100mm on the XCD 35-100E is an f4. And in terms of metering, I go to center weighted, but again, doesn't play a role in the same way as my ISO setting. And now I will start to run the animation and we'll see if we can catch the rectangle and if it is then replicated by the sensor into the image without any diagonal distortions. And by the way, in manual focus mode, my life is easy because I can still use the magic AFD button to find focus. Have a look. Here we go. We are in focus. If I would mess this up with focus, let's go here. AFD is always covering my back. So this is easy. So let me basically leave my chair here, go over and start the animation. Let's go here on the MacBook to the play button. And then we get this. And let's first of all make this a bit slower. And let's see what the electronic shutter is doing in this case. Let's make it slow. Slow, nice and smooth, so we don't get nervous from looking at that. And now I just wait for the right moment, and since I have focus already, I can just take the shot. Even at that speed, you see now diagonal distortions, right? Let's quickly switch from electronic shutter into mechanical shutter, which is the leaf shutter in the lens. So let's go here to exposure. Let's deactivate this, and then let's have a look at the difference. Here we go. Take the shot and you see no distortions. So let's go into play mode quickly. Let me show you this. This is mechanical shutter. This is electronical shutter. And I have a comparably low speed of that animation, right? And that's interesting. Let's have a little bit of fun. Let's speed the animation up. Let's see what happens. So let me get here. Let me make this quicker. So we get a more elevated effect. Now I need to make sure that I don't miss the right moment to fire. And let's go here. Here we go. Let's do this again. And this looks good in mechanical shutter, leaf shutter in the lens. Let's switch into electronic shutter. And we go to exposure again. This deactivates the leaf shutter in the lens and activates the electronic shutter. Let's wait for the next shot. Here we go. Oh, I missed it. Look at that. That's the rolling shutter effect at its best, right? That's what I wanted to demonstrate. And let's do one more. Here we go. Distortions, right? If you are hunting a square, which you will never do with your camera because it's complete nonsense and absurd, you will not be able to capture this in a rectangle form. You will have diagonal distortions if you use the electronic shutter. Let's do this once more because it's so much fun. Boom. Going back to mechanical shutter, just to have proof of concept, and repetition always proves that this is a repeatable experiment. Here we go. This is a rectangle, right? All right, a few points I want to make in addition to what you just saw. First of all, one takeaway we already saw is the faster the animation, the more elevated the rolling shutter effect. And that's pretty natural, pretty clear. But there is a second aspect I want to quickly illustrate, and that's that the rolling shutter effect is more elevated the closer you are to the subject. If a moving subject is a tiny little thing moving somewhere at the horizon of the scene, your rolling shutter effect will be less elevated than if you are standing next to a bus or a car and trying to take that photo in the two examples I showed you before when we talked about the theory of rolling shutter. And let me quickly illustrate this to you. So let me start the Python script again and that little animation. So we see that. Let's do this again. And first of all, let's go to the speed point. I make this very slow. In this way, very, very slow. So let's switch back into electronic shutter here. We need to go to exposure. We need to activate it and deactivate the leaf shutter in the lens. And the rectangle is now pretty slow. Let's take a shot. Even here with that low speed, you have some distortions. Now let's speed this up. Let's make this quicker. Let's make it much quicker. And then I have really to concentrate to catch the rectangle at all. I'll probably fire when it enters the scene on the left-hand side. And then this is much more elevated. Have a look here. Let's go into play. This is high speed. This is low speed. Still you see some distortions, but not as elevated as here. So speed really matters. And as I said, that's super natural and super logical. Let me illustrate my second point. Let's go back into live view and let's shoot at 100mm and then let's zoom out of the scene and let's see what effect we achieve. And by the way, why this is darkening is because I have center weighted metering here. And in the Hasselblad, we only have these three. I showed this in my 20 tips and tricks on the Hasselblad X2D Mark II. We only have center weighted. Spot will even further elevate this darkening of the screen when the white rectangle comes to the light metering spot. And then we have center spot. So we keep this at center weighted, but we shoot again at 100mm. Here we go. I missed it. Let's do this again. Here we go. That's how it looks at 100mm. Now let's zoom out. And let's go here to 35mm and let's take that shot again. Here we go. Let's compare these images. This is at 35mm. This is at 100mm, 35, 100. And you see, if you have moving subjects in the scene, in landscape, for instance, you are shooting from the mountains into a valley and you have cars or people at the far horizon moving, rolling shutter effect will not be really elevated and maybe is even negligible. If you're standing on the side of a street and shooting a car which is passing by nearby, then the rolling shutter effect will be very elevated in the same way as you see it here in this little illustration. Now, of course, someone could come and say, maybe this is not a fair test. Maybe no camera can capture an electronic shutter this animation on the screen. So I want to basically show you that we have a fair competition here. And for this, I've mounted now my Sony Alpha 1 Mark II. And if you go into the menu, it will be in electronic shutter. Let me show you. I think this is somewhere here. Let's go here. Let's go down. We have here shutter type. Let's go here. And you see, this is an electronic shutter. So same setup as on the Hasselblad X2D. If we look into the shooting parameters, I've set this also up for 1/500 seconds. In the tele setting on the Hasselblad, we had an f4 that corresponds in the full frame equivalent setup to an f3.2. I'm in auto ISO mode. I'm in center weighted metering. So I have kind of the same setup. Now I've mounted here the new G Master 28-70, where a review of this absolutely fantastic lens will come to my channel very soon. So stay tuned and don't miss it. And that can only go up in the tele setting to 70 millimeters. So as you see, I'm filming in the same perspective as the Hasselblad before. I moved the Sony to compensate for that closer to the MacBook Pro. And for this, I will also now get you a bit closer to that camera. And now we start that experiment again, and we'll also make the rectangle speedy, and we'll see if the Sony Alpha 1 Mark II has a fast enough readout time and image processing engine to capture this animation, this little rectangle, without any diagonal distortions. So let me start the animation. Let me go to the MacBook and push the play button. Here we go. Let's make this faster. Then I have to focus, of course, when shooting. So now this is flying really fast. And I'm here in autofocus mode. Maybe I should change that. Well, I think the Sony will capture that. Let's see. Here we go. Have a look at play. No distortions, right? That looks good. Let's do this again. This is a rectangle, right? It has a little bit of an artifact here on the left-hand side, but totally different to what we saw on the Hasselblad X2D Mark II, where this rectangle was actually leaning towards the left-hand side by diagonal distortions. Let's do it once more. Boom, you see how fast this is. And again, we have a rectangle with a little bit of an artifact here, but it's not diagonally distorted. Once more, because this is really fun. I should have switched this into manual mode instead of experimenting with autofocus. Now we catch it. Here we go. Movement fuzziness, I could probably go to 1/1000 seconds. Then this might be even better. Let's try this. Let's go here and let's go here to 1/1000 seconds. Wait. Here we go. This is a rectangle. It's not diagonally distorted. So my test, when I put the Hasselblad X2D Mark II to test, is in fact fair. And there are cameras who have a sensor with a much faster readout time than the Hasselblad X2D Mark II sensor. And that's the Sony Alpha 1, that's the Nikon C9, which relies on electronic shutter only. That's the Nikon C8 and maybe a bunch of other cameras. But that's the three I know for sure. They are fast enough to replicate this as a rectangle and not as a diagonally distorted shape. But let me know. And please drop me a comment. Do you like my little laboratory here? Do you think this is a useful Python script and something which I can use more often when we test for these type of effects? And second question is, do you want to see other cameras or comparisons? Since I have programmed this now anyway and coded in Python, I can repeat that test at any time with any camera you want to see. There's one more point I want to make, and I showed this in video already. Why would people want to use electronic shutter? And first of all, let's get this camera back into my usual shooting modes here. So let's go to exposure. Let's go to mechanical shutter. I think I mentioned repeatedly that I do not use electronic shutter at all, but there might be reasons where you want to use it. Let's go back here. Let's go here into autofocus. Now you see autofocus continuous is no longer grayed out because we are now relying on the leaf shutter in the lens, which is a mechanical shutter. Let's go to autofocus single. I think that's good. And let's also go into aperture priority, which is my most used shooting mode. All right, so here we go. That was just housekeeping. Why would people want to use electronic shutter? And the reason is that your shutter speed in this camera is limited and will only get super fast if you use electronic shutter. I was a bit too quick going into aperture priority. I should have stayed in fully manual mode. I show you here. So we are in the setup, which I use currently a lot, Hasselblad X2D Mark II and XCD 35-100E. And let's go here and let's have a look. How fast can we go? We can only go to 1/4000 seconds. And by the way, on the XCD 38V in another video, I showed you end of story is there already at 1/2000 seconds. Now, the big advantage of the leaf shutter in the lens is that this is also our highest flash sync speed. And that is, of course, something which really gives Hasselblad a big advantage relying on leaf shutters compared to other camera systems. So you can fully flash sync up to speed of 1/4000 seconds. But that's end of story. What if you have a very bright sunny day and you have the aperture widest open? Currently, let's go here on the aperture to 2.8. And the scene is still too bright. Well, then you can use a neutral density filter, or you can go to electronic shutter and see what happens if we do that. Let's go back into the menu. And now we can go faster. We can go to 1/6000 seconds. And that is an advantage, of course. But you should, based on what you've just seen, only use it in still image scenes where you have no moving subjects, or based on what I explained after the experiment, where moving subjects are tiny little objects in the scene far at the horizon, like you're shooting a landscape and far at the horizon is a car driving. Then your rolling shutter effect will not matter. It's theoretically still there, but it's negligible. But if you are shooting a scene where moving subjects, even slowly moving subjects, you saw that with my rectangle. I slowed down the speed and it still had these distortions. If you have these type of situations, then it's better to avoid going into electronic shutter, because the image will basically not be usable. So let's go back to mechanical shutter, which is my usual setup. And for this particular lens with 1/4000 seconds, that typically is enough even on a bright sunny day. All right, that's it. That's all I wanted to say and show. I hope you like my little rolling shutter effect testing laboratory here with my Python script. As I said, drop me a comment if you like it and if you want to see more cameras put to test with this little testing environment. If you liked that video, don't forget to drop me a thumbs up. Stay tuned on my channel. There's always more to come. Thanks for watching. Stay safe and healthy. And of course, peace out.